Hello, and welcome to 15 Minutes in the Forest. I'm Karen Snape with Virginia Cooperative Extension, and today I'm going to be bringing you 15 minutes on some weird trees. Just some trees that are a little bit unusual or quirky or interesting. And I took these videos over the course of the past several months. Some of the time I had to wear a mask because I was on the Virginia Tech campus. So I apologize for any muffling, but hopefully you enjoyed this segment. So it's mid-October here on the Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg, and we're looking at a dawn redwood. Not a native tree, but a popular landscape ornamental tree. And an interesting fact about this tree is that it is a deciduous conifer. That is to say that it produces cones like a pine tree, but it drops its leaves in the fall. So here's a branch of that tree. You can see that it has needle-like leaves, like other conifers. It has these little cones that will turn brown. So here are some of those cones that have turned brown. These are from last year. So these are the seed-bearing structures of the dawn redwood. A native tree that you might confuse this with is the bald cypress. They're very similar in that they are both deciduous conifers. They both have fine needles in sort of feathery arrangements, and they both have sort of a strippy kind of a bark. But the bald cypress has an even more feathery leaf and also a larger cone. So here's a lovely bald cypress growing in one of the parking lots down by the stadium. And bald cypress is a deciduous conifer. It is a tree with needle-like leaves that produces cones, but that loses those leaves in the winter the way that we are more accustomed to seeing broadleaf trees do. And it is native to Virginia and naturally grows in swamps and wetland areas in the eastern, especially southeastern part of the state. The needles are borne in these long feathery arrangements, longer and finer than the ones that we saw on the dawn redwood, and they'll actually fall off the tree wholly like this in the feathers. As does the dawn redwood. Here are the cones of the bald cypress tree, and you can see that they are quite a bit bigger than the ones that we saw on the dawn redwood, and they are on much shorter little stems. The cones are sort of spherical or globular. This one still on the tree is all closed up, although it is turning from green to a browner color. We also have some on the ground here that are further along, and you can see how each scale of that cone is kind of opening up, and it very easily is falling apart, and you know, there's seeds inside there. And here's the bark on that bald cypress. So again, somewhat similar to the dawn redwood, peeling, kind of strippy orange beneath, perhaps a bit more chippy as opposed to the longer peelings of the dawn redwood, but very similar. Light gray, light tan to gray on top with orangey underbark where it has peeled off. We are just in a parking lot island here on the Virginia Tech campus, but you can see that this bald cypress tree is trying to put up something of a cypress knee. So these knobs of wood, that's root material sticking up out of the mulch, would help the tree if it were growing in a swamp to maintain stability, and possibly also to aid with air exchange. Roots, unlike leaves, Roots require oxygen to live. They don't photosynthesize, they respire just like we do, and they require oxygen. And so when a tree is growing in standing water, it needs a way to keep those roots oxygenated. And we think that cypress knees help to do this for the cypress tree, as well as acting kind of like buttresses to help keep the tree stable in the soggy, mucky wetland ground. All three of these trees are ginkgos. Ginkgos are a really unusual tree, one of the oldest kinds of trees of their kind. And we'll go and take a closer look. These three trees are in different stages of fall color change. When a ginkgo changes color, it tends to go all at once very dramatically, and then all the leaves will fall off very shortly after. Ginkgos are one of the oldest kinds of broadleafed trees, or angiosperms. And you can see, if you look closely at the leaves, you can see the sort of impression of what were the needles of a conifer that fused together to form this unusual fan-shaped leaf of the ginkgo. Ginkgo trees are angiosperms, which means that they produce true flowers, not just the pollen-bearing structures of pines, firs, and spruces, and fruit, which is not like a cone, like a pine cone. The fruit of the ginkgo tree is very stinky. It smells kind of like manure, quite bad. And you can see on this tree how absolutely loaded it is with those fruits. Ginkgos are dioecious, meaning that there are male and female trees. Only female trees produce the fruit, and so they are often selected for in nurseries and many plantings in urban areas, and along sidewalks like this are only of male trees, so that they do not produce this stinky fruit for people to step on and track into buildings. Here in late October, this ginkgo tree is a little bit ahead of the others. It's turned a golden color and has already dropped many of its leaves. You have to catch a ginkgo on the right day to see it like this. It will turn completely golden, and then all of the leaves will fall off in just a short time frame. This next tree is the Osage oranges. These ones are growing in what was a hedgerow on what was probably a farm, but is now a housing development. Osage orange can grow up to 60 feet tall, but is typically more in the range of 30 feet tall, with a short trunk and a many branched, rounded crown. The bark of the Osage orange is brownish, often brownish orangish, or brownish with a sort of orangey underbark, and lengthwise furrows and strips. And I've come here to the historic Smithfield plantation on the Blacksburg campus, where they have this really large, really rather magnificent specimen of the Osage orange. It's really quite tall for an Osage orange, and we are going to go on the other side of the fence there and get a closer look. As we scan up this tree, we see how sort of gnarled and forked it is. Even a very large specimen like this is not something that really anybody would ever think of harvesting for lumber. But the wood was actually very highly prized by Native Americans because it is very strong and very flexible and very good for making bows. In fact, in parts of the U.S. that were settled by the French, the Osage orange is often called bow dark, which comes from the French words for wood that you make bows out of. So here's a nice closer look at that bark that I talked about before, with the long vertical fissures and the slightly orangey underbark. You can really see that if we come over here where some of the bark has more freshly peeled off. The tree originally is native to Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and up into a little bit of Oklahoma. The name Osage orange comes from the Osage Indian tribe that also lived in that area. Osage orange twigs produce very large, sharp thorns. This is one of the things that made it really useful as a hedgerow for keeping cattle and things in. And so this was planted all over the United States. The range was expanded by planting for hedgerows for keeping livestock in. So the thing that makes Osage orange a weird tree is this fruit. You can see it is the size of like a grapefruit or a softball, and it has all of these little furrows and bulges and just a really interesting texture. When I was a kid, we called these monkey brain trees because we thought that the fruits looked like a monkey's brain. These fruits, when fertilized, can contain up to 200 seeds. It's a composite fruit, so a fruit made from many flowers packed close together. So it is January, and as you can see, these Osage orange fruits are just laying all over the place, turning black and rotting because nothing is eating them. A fruit that large, you would expect something to eat. And typically, the reason that trees and other plants make fruits is so that they will be eaten and the seeds carried off by animals and deposited in other areas. But nothing really much eats Osage orange fruits. Squirrels will pick at them a little bit, and if they're very desperate, cattle will eat them, but they're really not eaten by very much. And so one theory that people have, and I don't know how this could ever be proven, but one theory people have is that these fruits used to be eaten and the seeds dispersed by large mammals that are now extinct. Things like mastodons and ground sloths and things that lived here in prehistoric times. And that the fact that these animals aren't around anymore might be one of the reasons for the very limited range of the Osage orange just in the Osage lands. So here are 3 very nice American holly trees growing on the Virginia Tech campus. Now you might not think that an American holly tree is a weird tree because they are extremely common, but I'm here to tell you they're pretty weird. So if we're going to say that trees like the redwood and the bald cypress are weird because they are deciduous conifers, then we have to kind of acknowledge that it's a little bit weird that hollies are evergreen broadleafs. So other examples of broadleaf evergreens include the southern magnolia and mountain laurel, but this is one of the most widely recognized examples. American holly has smooth gray or brownish gray bark. These thick, leathery, evergreen broadleafs with spines. I mean, we take it for granted. Everybody knows that holly trees have spines on them, but if this wasn't a tree that you saw all the time, these spines on the leaves would probably stop you in your tracks. I find it really hard to think of any other tree that has these. Of course, the American holly also produces berries. There aren't very many on this tree here, but you can see that it does have the little red holly berries that we're used to associating with Christmas. These are highly prized by robins and cedar waxwings and other birds like that. And like the ginkgo, they are only produced on female trees. So you may have a holly tree that has never produced berries, and there's nothing wrong with that tree. It's just a male tree, and only the female trees produce berries. And finally, we're going to end with Winterberry, which is a small native tree or large native shrub. And as you can see, it is a holly, an ilex, but it is deciduous. And so this one is called Winterberry. There's also one called deciduous holly, Ilex decidua, and a few others, just out there proving that even when you think you know the exceptions to the rules, there are exceptions to the exceptions to the rules, like these deciduous hollies. Thank you for joining me for this 15 minutes in the forest. Please come back next week when Bill Worrell will talk about the tastiest of forestry topics, syrup making.